Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for staying with us right to the end of the day for this final session on water security. We're discussing the innovations, the investments, the reforms that are needed to have a sustainable water future. My name is Nancy Kachingira from BBC News. It's my great pleasure to be guiding this session. Probably one of the most important topics we could be talking about today. Water sits right at the crossroads of everything that matters, whether it's sustainable development, geopolitical security, whether it's food security or even energy resilience. Water is at the crossroads of all these issues. However, there are different schools of thought as to how to finance water. Some say that water should be priced to reflect its true value. Others say that water is a fundamental human right that should be immune to market dynamics. So how do we find a bridge between these two divides? This is a conversation we'll be having today about some of the themes you've seen in that video. The fact that more than 2 billion people still face water security challenges, and the fact that less than 2% of global investment dollars are going into water infrastructure, despite the fact that climate change is exacerbating the water security challenge for many people in many regions in the world, and particularly in Africa, which is one of the regions where the EBRD will soon begin to invest. So to have this discussion today, I'm joined by a fantastic panel. Honestly, we couldn't have chosen better. I'll introduce them now. To my left is Walid Oueslati. He heads the Climate, Biodiversity and Water Division at OECD, following a distinguished career as a professor of environmental economics. And he's got over 50 published scientific articles and policy reports. He today is bridging for us the rigorous academic research and practical policy implementation. And we also have Cindy Yao with us right next to Walid. Cindy serves as head of investments at Metito, where she shapes financial strategies for water treatment projects across multiple markets. And she's got expertise in capital allocation and investment analysis, strengthening the water sector's financial foundation. So her insights will be extremely valuable today. Also joining us is Nicolas Osbert, who is Chief of Water, Sanitation and Hygiene, also called WASH, at UNICEF Ukraine. There he's coordinating emergency and recovery water initiatives, and he's done this in frontline areas for more than 20 years, spanning 4 continents, and that experience has included managing parts of India's $90 billion water investment plan. So we're very glad to have you with us today, Nicola. And from EBRD, we have with us Katarina Miroshnik, Director and Head of Infrastructure Eurasia, where she structures financing for public, private, and public-private partnership projects across multiple regions. She's got over 2 decades at the bank, and her team is delivering both debt and equity solutions for critical infrastructure. So that's making up our panel today. Before we step into the world of possibility, let's begin with looking at the challenges. And as we do that, I just want to remind you that we really want to hear from you in the room as well. We want to hear from your expertise. We'd love to get your questions. And to get involved with that, all you need to do is use Slido. Just scan the QR code that's on the screen with your phone, and you can very simply follow the instructions and join in the conversation. So do send through your comments, your questions, and I'll weave them into the discussion as we go. So first, it's important to understand the nature, the scale of the challenge. And Walid, if you can talk us through an overview of the scale of the problem. It's often been said that the water crisis manifests itself as too much, too little, too dirty. Could you break that down for us in terms of what we're seeing? What are the most pressing financial and non-financial challenges today when it comes to water security?
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you for having me here. Look, actually, indeed, to understand what is ongoing with water crisis, we should make a clear link with the climate change crisis. Because right now, the water, usually when you talk about climate change, we say, oh, this is abstract, we don't know what is it exactly. Water is the reality of climate change. As you say, it's little by here, more there, etc. And both too much or less is dirty because water quality is affected by water supply and demand.
So scarcity in some areas, floods in other areas.
Exactly. But I would like to go back to the number you gave in the beginning, you and also in the video. More than 2 billion people don't have access to water. So, and you said human right. But there's another number which is related to that. There's 1 billion, just they don't have access to drinkable water. And this is the essential need for humanity. Without water, there's no development. Without water, there's no peace. Without water, there's no life. That's it. And the disruption of the global hydrological cycle, it's a big challenge for the whole humanity. Yeah, and this actually came through mainly the climate change, was like the ecosystem, the Earth ecosystem is now affected by this disruption. Our human activities, the greenhouse gas emission that we are emitting now are creating a very critical situation. We talk about crisis, but it's more deeper than a crisis, and which all of us should have in mind today in the discussion. We are the first generation that have to address 2 challenges. Mitigating greenhouse gas emissions, so that we have to do it through the transformation of our economies, our society, our consumption, production modes, etc. But also we are the first generation, in addition to this challenge, is to adapt to climate change. Climate change is a reality, is ongoing. Water is part of it, but a big part of it, and adapting. And this in terms of public policy, financial needs, investment would be a big challenge. So while we are thinking about project to mitigating, we have also to think about the drought, to think about the desertification, wildfires, etc., etc. That's the big challenge for us. The investment needs are huge. We don't have the same exposure, but also we don't have worldwide the same means to address the project. And
explain what you mean by means.
Means actually economic resources, our capacity, technological resources also that we have. And when you think about this situation, actually it's really useless to think that we can solve this global problem with the national policies or unilateral action. International cooperation is essential, because we need to talk each together. We need to make technological transfer, but we need also to find a way that investment across the globe can target the emergency here and there.
Could you just very briefly paint a picture of what happens if there isn't a global response to this crisis, just briefly?
Yes, some countries may go ahead, may have more ambitious policies, improve their emissions and saying, oh, hey, I reached Paris Agreement target. But at the end of the day, it's the aggregate number would matter. How we reached actually our greenhouse gas emission reduction overall the globe. IPCC told us that by 2035, we have to cut down greenhouse gas emissions by 43%. 43%. 2035 is tomorrow, right? If it's not done, we can exceed the 1 degree Celsius, and this will open the door for many climate tipping points and a very catastrophic situation. So imagine the effort needed right now to go for that. It's a huge. Water is part of the picture, but that's, you ask me about the global picture. That's just what I want you. Water is part of it, but the big picture needs actually this collective and global action to address climate change very quickly from mitigation and adaptation.
Okay, and Nicola, with your many decades of experience, because we've just heard Walid talking about the fact that this is not about just national policies, it requires global intervention. What have you seen in terms of regulatory and institutional frameworks in terms of how they impact the flow of capital into water and sanitation projects? Because that's a crucial factor.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll try to give a bit of field perspective on this question. First, I believe in most of the country where you're going to invest, you won't find a water and sanitation sector. It's completely fragmented and diluted. I take the example of Ukraine. Drinking water quality is the responsibility of the Ministry of Health. Drinking water quality on the source, it's the Ministry of Environment. Water and sanitation services and infrastructure under the Ministry of Development. And you have a national regulator and also the local authorities. So there is no such thing as a Minister of Water and Sanitation. It's very rare. And
so you're saying even on a national level, this is a fragmented issue with
completely same
coordination.
Goes for countries in Africa where I've worked, Zambia, Mali, fragmented sector. To the best, what you get is a strong drive from the head of state, like in India, in Ethiopia, and Nigeria, big countries. So what are the consequences in terms of regulation and pragmatic implementation? There is a lack of coordination and evidence to really invest in the right place. It's very difficult. And it's difficult to get the right information. And my experience is that in any country, the people that have the real institutional memory, the key informants, are very few, not difficult to find, but only few of them. In Zambia, there was one person with the institutional memory able to support an approach like this. And in Ukraine, there is only one very strong expert on legal aspect for water and sanitation. So that's one of the consequences, hence the importance of coordination, and this is why we appreciate the effort in that sense. If I can look at the regulatory aspects that really influence your projects, your programs, one, of course, it's all about the cost recovery mechanisms, be it with tariff or with subsidized approach. But in many places, I'm taking again Ukraine, the water utilities are facing an increase of the cost of delivering the services of around 40%, decrease of revenues of 40%. So there is no break-even, there is no set-aside money, because the water bills are supposed to pay for the service and the set-aside money to repay the loans and to repair decayed infrastructure. So in that context, it's not likely to happen. So, but in other places, the tariff can be a strong incentive for quality of services. There will be discussions on public-private partnerships. So one, cost recovery. Two, of course, the technology you want to implement depends on the regulation. There are things that are forbidden. In Ukraine, simple technology like wastewater treatment ponds are not yet authorized, which is a shame because it would decrease the cost of the recovery. So not yet, but we are working on it. Yeah. So, but in other places, there is a technology authorized, but there is no capacity to implement it. So be careful. You will often be pushed towards the standards of Singapore, of Denmark, which are not adapted to the country where you work, and so push for lower cost but easy to maintain technologies. That's about the regulation. And finally, all the aspects of monitoring systems. Do they exist? Are they there? And that, to me, it's the most important, especially that if you want equity, if you really want to reach the unserved people, the hard to reach, if you don't have an M&E system to find them, it's quite difficult. In that front, be careful, because what is on paper for M&E and what is really monitored is often different. I'll take the example of the Swachh Bharat mission, the huge sanitation campaign from the government of India, $25 billion invested. And the target was open defecation-free India. But the reality, it was one household, one toilet. So it was a toilet construction program and a self-declared open defecation-free status in the villages. And that's why this program was very much driven by providing toilets, and sometimes they were cruising at 4,500 toilets per hour. That's wow. the type of approach. So that's the second point, the technology. And the third point, sorry, the monitoring system. If the monitoring system is weak, it's not a fatality. Small investment using new information technology, real-time monitoring, can really fill the gap before you have a national system. We have done it in Mali for rural water supply. It worked very well. You can have automatic replies, and you can have a dashboard on your drinking water pipe schemes. The same for Zambia for a rural sanitation program. So it's not because it's not there that you can do something about it through partnership. And finally, I'll go back to the equity aspect, how regulation is critical for really choosing carefully where you put your investment. The needs are huge. We heard about the climate crisis that will just contribute to increase the needs. So the design and the selection of your project is critical. And how can regulation be a nudge, a push for accountability? And so there are very clever public-private partnerships. They have been, for instance, I implemented some in Africa, in Mali, in Ghana. And basically, if the regulation authorized the delegation to a small-scale service providers, and the incentive is about financial incentive, market-driven, about the number of connections made or the volumes of water sales, they are going to look at every corner of the small town or the village to connect people. Mm-hmm. And that brings traction on quality on what you do. Well, there will be, and an M&E system will allow you to find the unserved people. In India, we were talking about pockets of population unreached. A pocket of population in India is the whole of Belgium. That's a pocket of population. So the importance of finding the unserved population is critical. So to conclude, support coordination. This is where you can learn all those aspects. You cannot arrive in the country and know it all, but people that have been there know and can connect you. So find the right key informants, map out the regulatory framework, and with a distinction between what is on paper and what is implemented. Mm-hmm. Big gap here. Mm-hmm. And
I'm just going to, because sure. I know with 20 years of experience, you have a lot to say on this topic, but I just want to pick up on something you mentioned there. You've done a great job of laying out the impact of regulation and just how many different touch points it has with the impact on solving the water issue. But if I can pick up on your point about technology and come to you, Cindy, because there's a realization now that non-conventional, or what we call non-conventional approaches to solving the water problem are not just optional. Now they are almost essential. Just talk to us a little bit about what some of the key factors are that influences investors' risk appetite with investing into some of these not so conventional methods.
Okay. First of all, thank you for having me to share the private sector's experience. Before I talk about the factors, I would like to say we must acknowledge that there's always trade-off both tangible and intangible factors between the adding those non-conventional water solutions such as in desalination versus increase the water supply for the community. I would say there's high cost of energy. There is increased CO2 emission. Also damage the threat to the marine ecosystem. So we need to really find a right balance to add such as desalination into the water infrastructure mix. to basically to seek new technologies and, as you mentioned, technology to help us to reduce the energy costs as well as to reduce the impact of the environmental issue. So let me talk about the facts we always consider as a private sector. So the bankability is the first very important element for us to consider, in particular spending large capital-intensive investments, as well as sharing the risks between the public sector and the private sectors. So in a very balancing the manner, because some of the PPPs we're seeing, the public sector is pushing a lot for the private sector to accept. So it need to be educated in the manner, say that we need to be balanced the risks and the benefits. Obviously the lack of the guarantees from the public sector, the creditworthiness of the public sector, the municipalities, as those are very key important. In the context of desalination, I would say the affordability is the key, because what we're seeing is that desalination, is the energy required to power the plant is the most important one. So around 40 to 50% of the production costs is coming from the energy. So what we're seeing is there are two technologies where we seem to be used right now. One is thermal, one is the reverse osmosis technologies. Thermal, we know it's using fossil fuels, and then burning the fuels will increase the CO2 emissions. So it's not viable. So most of the thermal plants right now are replaced by reverse osmosis RO plants. But RO has its own factors. RO using lots of the energy is coming from electricity. So it depends, the stability of the plants, it really depends how the energy is generating. So the energy is, if you see the plants, vulnerable of the plants, maybe because of the movements of the energy price, and also the power grid instability. So it's very important for us to understand it. So all the issues around the desalination, nowadays we're seeing renewable desalination, which is the trend. I believe it will reduce the carbon and reduce the requirements of the power requirements, and then but
so would you say that's the most promising trend? What would you say is the most promising trend?
Yes, I would say yes. It depends on the experts that are here, but I would say that we will see the renewable desalination is the trend right now. But right now, the 100% renewable plants are very small in size. So the big ones, you see the hybrid, the 100% renewable power, that these are plants, combined with maybe the battery storage, are feasible, but we still have to wait to see. It's still in the more construction planning stage, not really that much in operation, long-term operation trend, and we still need to see whether those are feasible for large desal plant.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I think your interventions here have really given us a sense of how big the challenge is, because it is. But the good news is there are solutions.
Yes.
And that's what we're going to come to. And Katja, I'll come to you just after we see this video that just gives us a frame of mind in terms of what we're talking about when we look at potential solutions. Yes, so the key words there are working together. As you can see, it's about many solutions coming together to solve these issues. A reminder that you can join the discussion, send through any questions that occur to you, any contributions you want to make. Just scan the QR code and follow the instructions there, and I'll be able to see all your comments and weave them into the discussion. But Katya, if I can come to you. So we've seen the scale of the challenge. What kind of role are multilateral development banks like the EBRD actually playing in terms of introducing solutions into these dynamics?
Thank you, Nancy. Yes, we are quite present in the water sector space. In EBRD, we have been doing since 2008. We've invested more than 4 billion euros in more than 250 projects across our region. So basically, this 15 projects a year.
That's a lot.
That's a lot, yes. And we've been doing conventional water, wastewater infrastructure, like urban, rural, but also some non-conventional, infrastructure pieces like water reuse, flood protection, and nature-based solutions. And we see that the majority of these projects they require blended finance. And the majority of our projects are highly dependent on donor funding contributions to make these projects affordable. So basically, we as the multinational development bank, we try to bring these blended solutions to our clients. How do we see blended finance? Blended finance could bridge the gap between the public funding limitations and the needs for large-scale investments. And of course, they try to attract private sector because blended solutions, they de-risk the projects and they enhance returns for private sector. The trends that we see in the region, for low-income countries, there is a need to have more capital grants in the projects, again, given the affordability constraints. In the more developed markets, we see the use of more sophisticated instruments like concessional loans, margin subsidies, or guarantees. Also, usually blended finance come from different sources. Could be public sources like national budgets, and it could be international donors. We see bilateral donors, we see various climate funds, and also we, EBRD, we allocate our profits to co-finance projects. So basically, we allocate part of our net profit to co-finance as a grant together with our loans. And I can give you a few examples.
Actually, I was just going to say, you've talked about this big number, but because ultimately what we're talking about here is people's lives. This impacts how people live, how they're able to move around and develop in their economies. Can you just give us a story almost? Tell us about one of those places where these interventions have really made a difference.
Yes, probably the best example, I would say, of their concession funding provider in our region is the European Union. Of course, they provide different instruments, capital grants, margin subsidies, guarantees. And the best example, I would say, is probably Romania. We, as EBRD, we started working in Romania 30 years ago in 1995. And since then, we provided almost slightly less than €500 million in loans to 25 water utilities across Romania. And the European Union co-financed with us, but they provided 10 times more. They provided €5 billion in capital grants to support these water utilities. So it's a huge impact. And of course, Romania benefited a lot from this type of programs the European Union was providing. Of course, in some other markets, the scale is different, but nevertheless, the impact of blended finance is important. For example, in Central Asia, good examples are Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. For example, in the Kyrgyz Republic, we financed also more than 20 cities where we provided finance for water projects for the total amount of €200 million. More than half of this financing came in the form of capital grants from EU, from the Swiss Development Agency, SECA, and also from our own profits. And a very similar situation in Tajikistan, where we provided €150 million, and again, more than 50% of the money came in the form of capital grants. again, a few other examples. I don't know if you have time. I can also.
But if you had to pick out from those examples, what are some of the golden threads that run through in terms of the critical factors for success in those projects? If I can ask you maybe to mention, if there are 3 top things you say that made those projects successful, what would you say they are?
Well, number 1 is proper preparation, ability by the MDB to mobilize concessional funding, whether it's from international donors or from national budgets. And of course, it's important the project bankability in the end that Cindy was mentioning earlier. So the project should be commercially viable, and of course, the regulation behind tariff increases or combination of tariffs and subsidies is critical.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's great to hear that these interventions are working. Walid, if I come back to you, and let's step back a little and look at responses that exist, because the Global Commission on the Economics of Water is calling for a new approach to valuing and governing water. So in light of that, what key policy reforms and blended finance mechanisms, because as we've heard from Katia and Cindy, that's the way to go. What key reforms do you think and mechanisms are needed to make that vision a reality?
Yes, one important message coming from the Global Commission on Economics of Water to change the statute of water to become a global common good. It's not any good like you think private good. It's really common in the sense that is owned by everyone, and in the sense of a human right also that we mentioned. This have huge policy implications in the sense that first it became question of public authority responsibility to make sure that the water supply is enough to guide the economy, but also is to send a price signal for investors, but also for consumers, that water is not for free. Water have a value for society. When you put your policy thinking that there's no problem about pricing water, you will end up with any other common good, air pollution, whatever. So we have that nobody will take rational in better managing the water. However, when you say water for our society is important. And another point important coming from the Global Commission, that we have a different context. We cannot talk about water in Canada in the same way in sub-Saharan African countries. It's a really different context. So the social consideration of water is really important. And again, in the context of climate change. So what policy reforms is needed? First is to make sure that there's a value for water. Water is not for free. And if I use a kind of very generic sentence, cheap water have high cost for the society.
Cheap water has high cost for the society. I'm going to ask you to explain that, just because I think it's related to a question here from David in the audience, who says, considering the role of water in sustainable development and geopolitical stability, how can we balance the urgent need for water security versus the long-term goal of environmental sustainability? So, Walid, I'm just going to ask you to expound on that point about cheap water and balancing the obvious need for water security with environmental sustainability.
Exactly. Coming to the fact that it's a common good, it's public good, and the global public good, so it means that there's a responsibility in stabilizing the global hydrological cycle. In that sense, first, we need a collaboration in terms of investment and in terms of addressing needs here and there. And second, you need a holistic approach when it comes to water. Because I was listening, even in the presentation and the short video, you have the keywords. But it's not segmented like this, actually, because it's not just a question to identify what investment I need to make water supply and water available. It's how water is mainstreamed in the economy. So I can you like examples, concrete example. I can give you an example. In one North African country, following the mainstream of development that can just give priority to the economic sector that provide the comparative advantage in the international trade, saying, okay, tourism for us is very good. So what you will do, just you will invest in tourism. Tourism is just, you need to fill the pools, you need to have the green grass, you need to have a golf, but in the context of very severe drought. So you uptake water from other sector in the economy, agriculture sector, residential sector, etc., to make sure that the tourism is good for the eyes of tourists to see a green grass while it's 45 degrees. So actually, just I stop here the example because, but just to understand when I say holistic approach that we need with water to change the software to think about water. International trade, value change have to take in account the water incorporated in any product we trade around the world, because that project can create a vulnerability situation in some countries.
Mm-hmm. And I'm just thinking, Cindy, because as Walid is explaining this as a global good, it's a global commodity. But how does that translate to private investors who are obviously seeking a return on their investment? In terms of solutions, which blended finance models do you see as being as promising and inviting for the investor as they are for Walid's question of sustainability, of caring for the environment, and for the global good?
I concur actually both Walid's and Katya's views. Blended finance does work.
What makes it work for the investor? Sorry.
Yeah. Matito operating in the emerging markets, where those markets need the innovative financing solutions, I would say, to make the project viable, to make the project sustainable, to make the project affordable. I think that's very important because those countries need water. Water scarcity is the key for them, and then they don't have the means to make it affordable. So let me give you an example what we experienced. The branding financing works. Matito implemented a project, PPP project in Kigali, in sub-Saharan country. The project has is first PPP, large-scale PPP in sub-Saharan. So the project has 27-year concessions and 2-year construction, 25-year O&M operations. Project size around the 60 million. So we had a long-term senior debt and fairly long-term, but also we had viability funding gap to support the project because it reduced the upfront costs for the government to basically to connect more household in the city and without the tariff increase. So that helps tremendously for the project. Basically made the project is the assured and also the security for the private sector. So it's affordable for the private sector, for the public sector, for its win-win situation. And then we had a meager to cover for the political risks, the country, the currency, convertible issues. So all those are put together. So blended finance does work. But we need, as a private sector, we do need to have more of those innovative solutions to present to us, also to educate private sector. Those are the solutions available. Because otherwise sometimes we don't know which funding, like concession fundings available for us. So we have to ask, and then sometimes maybe we don't know. So it's very much important, the communication between the financing parties, institutions, and the private sector. Also educate the public sector as well. So make the whole project affordable. That's really important and sustainable. Otherwise, it's difficult for public sector to accept, for private sector to reduce the risk. Obviously private sector do seek for return, but then the blended financing does make work in terms of without sacrificing the return, make the project affordable.
So those goals can be aligned, and it's great to hear that example. But it sounds like from what you're saying, collaboration is so important. And Nicola, I'm really struck going back to your example of the whole institutional knowledge of a water sector ending up in one person in the entire country. That's quite shocking. I'm just wondering if on the other side you can tell us about examples of collaboration that have yielded positive results.
Yes, thanks. Yeah, as mentioned, and we could hear that, who are the usual suspects in water and sanitation business? You have the government, the line ministries, the regulator, the communities, the municipalities, private sector, and research institutions. All of these working together. We all work with that crowd wherever we are.
And so, sorry, if you could start with Cindy's question, because she was talking about education. Who does that? Whose job is that? Who is supposed to do that?
The coordination?
The education, the making sure
education
people
as
like
well
Cindy
to prepare the future generation.
Where to find these things.
It increases the pool of stakeholders to make a meaningful water and sanitation program investment. So hence the coordination is critical, and I'll share some meaningful examples. First, in most of the countries, some coordination exists. So find it and participate to it actively and try to change it from within if it's not action-oriented enough. If it's not there, create it. In some places, there was no coordination. When I was in India, the big shots to support the government's program were World Bank, Gates Foundation, Tata Trust, a big corporate, UNICEF, and that was it. And we created a group to coordinate the programs. In Ukraine, we also established the coordination of the donor group, UNICEF, because of since December 2023 with EBRD, EIB, World Bank, the EU, and all the bilateral donors, because there was a gap and a demand for it. Some ground rules for coordination, quickly. It's demanding. Don't engage in coordination if you don't have the human resources. It takes time. And if you think of it, coordination is because there is a gap in the capacity of the government. They are supposed to do the coordination. So think about that you are in gap-filling mode, so plan your exit from the onset. The idea of coordination is to build national capacity, and if you did a good job, you get out of the picture. It takes a bit of time. 2-3 examples. What do we focus on coordination and what it brings? Defining the gaps, preventing gaps and duplication in any program. That's the easy one. Addressing bottlenecks and strengthening that national leadership. So my first example of impactful coordination, it's, let's go back to India. So there was this big program, big investment from the government, and the government absolutely wanted to declare India open defecation free in October 2019. We said, you did a great job, but you're not there yet. But so be it. And they went ahead, and then after that, we saw that it's still continuing, the practice of open defecation. So we did that joint advocacy, World Bank, Gates Foundation, Tata Trust, backed up by solid evidence. And we went to see the minister. Yeah, I know there is a relapse. Yesterday I was in Bihar, and I went in the countryside, and I stepped on the relapse, meaning I stepped on human feces. And finally, through evidence, at the end, we did a joint paper that was sent to Parliament, and it triggered the decision to invest a $17 billion sustainability phase of this national campaign. So that's through coordination. And another example in Ukraine, as I mentioned, big issue for loan type of support is that the solvency of the utilities. Tariffs are not up to the mark, frozen by the martial law, and so you cannot invest loans yet. And we tried to move the lines. World Bank spent 2 decades in moving that line before the war, with some success, but not that much. And now, thanks to this collective approach, under this coordination created, we generated evidence. We did a joint policy brief. All EIB, EBRD, World Bank accepted to put their logo. So it's a very powerful advocacy document, jointly co-created, and it moves the lines. So there was a decision last year to increase the tariff of business consumer by significantly, and it's narrowed the gap, the financial gap of utilities by 5%. Not up to the expectation of 20%, but it's still huge. And the other decision, and just before I came here, finally, the national regulator accepts that we try a new incentive-based tariff in Kiev city. And we hope this will be the way to really convince that by changing the tariff structure, the recovery can pick up. As was mentioned, it's not because you increase the tariff that it becomes automatically the burden of the poor. On the contrary, because the poor have a flat rate and not based on consumption, they pay more, or they don't even have connection to the water system, so they pay bottled water, which is 40 times the price of a water bill. That brings me to the conclusion on that question: backup coordination with robust evidence generation. You could move ahead on those fronts because it's coordination plus evidence generation. And you don't need to be an engineer with 30 years of experience. The more you can boil down the evidence to money, return on investment rates, and what is the cost of the morbidity and the mortality averted because you invested in water and sanitation. Those type of economic arguments, well defined, move the lines with the Ministry of Finance and others to accept investment and more support.
That's a very good practical point there. As they say, what isn't measured doesn't exist. And I'm going to come to the room for questions in just a moment. So if you've got one, we will have microphones coming round to you. But just before we get to that, Katia, we've heard a lot about how to foster this sustainable investment into water. I'm just wondering, in terms of successful PPP implementation, what have you seen? And particularly, where do you see some of the greatest opportunities in parts of Africa where the EBRD will be engaging?
Sub-Saharan Africa, we see different approaches to infrastructure and different access in different countries and also within those countries. For example, in Côte d'Ivoire, 73% of population have access to water supply, but if you look at the rural areas, it falls down to 15%. So, and of course, there are opportunities in the water supply there, but in the wastewater, they're even more acute. So lots of opportunities for private sector participation, because private sector, of course, can deliver on the investments. Of course, the projects are bankable for the private sector to invest. In terms of our experience and what is good and how to structure proper PPPs, we see that very important. The number one is to have proper capacity at the institutional level, at the government level, and we as EBRD could potentially help in training officials on PPPs, also help on drafting legislation, and we've done it in some other countries. Number two is proper project preparation and identification. Again, as the Multilateral Development Bank, we are helping countries to prepare PPP projects on a project-by-project basis, but sometimes we can provide financing to prepare projects on a national scale. For example, last year in Uzbekistan, we provided a $10 million loan to the government for a PPP preparation facility, and we expect to mobilize a similar amount from international donors in form of grants to help the country to prepare at least 10 PPP projects. So this can be done. In terms of project identification, Again, some projects are good for PPPs or easy to PPP. For example, in the water sector, if you're talking about the particular asset, like a wastewater treatment plant or a desalination plant, it's easy to PPP compared, for example, to an urban water wastewater network, which it may take some time to prepare. And also size matters. Smaller projects may not attract interest from private sector. Larger projects would definitely attract more interest, but sometimes too large projects can detract because it's not possible to raise financing. So it's all important. And of course, last but not least, risk allocation. Projects should be bankable. Either tariffs should be sufficient enough to cover the cost, or there should be subsidy mechanism in place or availability payments, again, to make the projects bankable and to attract private sector participation.
There's definitely a sweet spot, isn't there, in terms of hitting all those, hitting the right targets there. Is there anyone in the room who has a question at this point or a comment? Maybe this is an area you've got experience in. We'd love to hear from you. There's a hand just at the back there. We'll go to you first at the back, and we've got a hand here as well. We'll see who gets a microphone first and do it that way. Yes, go on. Please tell us your name and then jump right in with your question or comment. Yes, you can go ahead. Yeah. It should be
Hello?
on. Yeah.
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Unai Arrieta. I'm with TTA, based in Barcelona. We work with energy access, actually. And I see many overlaps in our work with rural and remote communities with energy access, mainly with solar, with the scarcity of water access. I would like to know how can we bundle both services, assuming the good synergies there are between energy access and water security? Thank you.
Thank you for that great question. Is there potential for wider collaboration between sectors? Who would like to take that one? Katya?
Well, I can say that sometimes, in some rural areas, the utilities are bundled together, and we see it in some of the markets. Of course, combining a water bill with the electricity bill helps a lot in terms of collection from the customers. But we see it happening in some of the markets. Yes, combining utilities together.
Okay, thank you. We had a hand at the back there. We'll get a microphone to you. No? Okay, that went away. Okay, looking at my Slido here, there's a few questions about environmental sustainability. That's obviously a big one, because I think, Cindy, you mentioned that some of these innovations come with a cost to the environment. And maybe just to bundle some of those questions together, just an overview in terms of what you feel are the right approaches to balancing those two sometimes competing aims. Not an easy one.
Yeah. I think the key is, Wally earlier mentioned, is we need to look at very holistically the water strategy first. We need to look at the source of the water available to us, and then we need to look at the demand and then supply to understand what's available right now for us, what we can use, and what we need to develop, such as we adding some non-conventional desalination. That's costly. But also we need to look at what's currently available, the technology available. So all those are put together. We need to look at very holistically in that. Hopefully I answered the question.
It's all, well, we're hearing this word a lot, aren't we? Holistic. And that really speaks to the importance of greater collaboration, greater communication, which is why it's important to have conversations like these. But I wonder, Walid, why do you think this sector sometimes receives not a lot of attention? We already mentioned that only about 2% of global investment dollars are going into what is really fundamental infrastructure. Why do you think that is?
Look, actually, it's not everywhere. Some countries are having a long tradition in managing water well in terms of preventing flooding, also providing water for different sectors. However, in other countries, water was considered as really something available. And now with the implication of climate change, it happens that we have to prepare this new world. A new word, what does mean? Actually means that effort on adaptation, investment in infrastructure, and I really pleased by hearing from the other panelists today about all the solution and efforts and the huge mobilization. We heard billions, etc., and really that's good, actually, in the good way. However, if I may, we are in a race against time. I don't want to be catastrophic, but what I mean today, the humanity is getting in existential crisis in the sense that first the demography is pushing, but in the same time we need to collaborate together to address this urgent needs for the humanity overall. Right, climate change in action. In action, and when we talk about climate change, people think about warming, but not only warming. Actually, when you have flooding here and you have drought there and you have wildfires, hurricane, etc. So that's something is really related to this disruption in the hydrological cycle. It's really warning. And this, when I say race against time, means actually we have absolutely to have a massive investment on all this technology, infrastructure to protect people, but also to prepare the path for the future. The future is a resilient future. How we make sure that our society, economies, etc. One point, again, I would like to highlight it. It's
and actually, as you make that point, I'm going to ask you to also give your final thought, and I'll go to the other panelists for their final thoughts, just about what you think is the next key step you would recommend in terms of achieving water security?
I think, again, the next step in water, what you ask me what is missing, I was about saying we are missing a kind of international structure for water. We have been talking about the climate negotiation. We have negotiation on biodiversity. There's text, there's engagement. For water is empty. There was a UN Water Conference in end of the 14th, and the last one take place 2 years ago in New York. So in 4 decades, what we did, actually, we don't care about water. And now we woke up and we say, oh, by the way, water is a problem and it needs international cooperation. I think we need absolutely to evolve in international treaty on water. And this, for all the bankers, asset manager, etc., is a very good signal, means that water is not cheap and water have a value for the society globally acknowledged, and the governments have to commit it to actually reach that.
Okay.
SDG 6, that's another story.
It's really a big gap. I know that there's so much more we could get into, but I'm just going to quickly get the final thoughts from the other panelists just as we wrap up. That's a great, as you said, key next step that you see. Cindy, what would you say is a next step you can identify?
There's still many hindering factors to prevent the private sector to invest. I say the most important one, I think, is to create more adequate the enabling environment. What I mean is to have the local stakeholders and the public sectors creating, putting more regulatory policies and the frameworks and then the laws enable for private sectors to participate, foreign investments participation. I think those are most important elements to succeed for the next, as a next step.
Thank you. Nicolas, your brief remarks on that?
My brief remarks to the audience: you go to a country and your capacity is on the $1 billion. you don't realize how much influence and responsibility you have as a game changer with those types of amounts. Please, we saw the demand is growing and the capacity to respond. So we need, all is about picking the right battle and making the right investment. So spend a bit of time, go beyond the obvious when it comes to regulation. There is the paper, there is the field reality, institutional memory. Link up with practitioners that have been there, and so that you have really something clever that moves the lines and influence. You have a role in terms of influencing the government. Please use it and learn from that. And I agree, given that the needs are growing and climate change are just going to increase the needs exponentially, we need multiplayers. The private sector is one part of the solution, and we need to work in two aspects. There are the small-scale service providers. I hear that you are going to invest in sub-Saharan Africa, where it's a bit less regulated but market-driven, and then you have the big corporate investment in, for instance, for the recovery of Ukraine, which is another ball game. This is about a regulation that allows sufficient time for investment and return on investment. This is how a lot of the European industries grew and could be applied elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicola. And finally, Katja.
And for me, regulation is critical to making sure that tariffs are at cost recoverable levels. It will allow to attract private sector. It will allow basically attract finance in the municipal level. So at all levels. So this is critical. Regulation behind the water sector.
Thank you so much. A big thank you to all of you, my panelists, for making it very clear. It's like that old proverb that says, you never understand the value of water until the well runs dry. Well, we hope we don't get there. And I think the solutions and implementation that you've mentioned today will absolutely help with that. Thank you. Please help me join thanking my panelists, and thank you to you as well for being a wonderful audience. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.